think it reinforced the research that I did on my book, that Jeffrey Epstein has always viewed himself as smarter than everybody else, and he also has collected people all along the way, particularly over the 2 decades through his trafficking. And that was always to get secrets and bits of information about individuals that he could pass to other people. He trafficked in.
Jeffrey Epstein's newly unsealed emails do not just brush up against the Harvey brand. They drag Marjorie Harvey's name into the same shadowy ecosystem that has already pulled in presidents, princes, and powerful fixers. At the exact moment her marriage to Steve Harvey is allegedly cracking under the weight of a $200 million split. We are looking at 3 forces colliding in late 2025. A disgraced financier's inbox finally opened to Congress, a television empire built on relationship advice, and a wife who insiders claim is now ready to talk under oath about what she saw, what she agreed to, and what she was pushed into during those years when Steve's career was rising fastest. In November 2025, when House committees dumped more than 20,000 pages of Epstein correspondence into the public record, observers immediately focused on the messages about Trump and the White House. But behind those headlines, entertainment attorneys say, were references that alarmed people close to the Harvey household in Atlanta.
In the emails, it is quite clear that Jeffrey Epstein had a wide, almost incalculably wide circle of associates. People who were celebrities, people who were either in foreign governments or leaders of foreign governments, business tycoons, and the like.
We have to be clear from the start. These emails are not a neat client list, and even lawmakers admit the archive released this fall is messy, partial, and politically weaponized. Democrats on the House Oversight Committee first rolled out a curated set of messages on a Wednesday in mid-November 2025, highlighting Epstein describing Trump as borderline insane and saying the former president knew about the girls, before Republicans hit back hours later with more than 20,000 pages they said would correct that narrative and expose selective leaks. Buried in that larger trove, according to legal sources familiar with the divorce preparation, are 2011 messages between Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, whose phrasing, timing, and redactions have now been quietly flagged in internal memos by attorneys working on high-profile marital cases, including the Harveys. Those attorneys are not talking on the record yet, but they are the ones telling us there is a name, or something close to a name, that mirrors Marjorie's in a chain that later reappears in sealed family court filings.
Interview is and never was part of the Epstein files. She was sentenced in 2025. This was an interview by Trump's lawyer to protect Trump from the fallout about the Epstein files. What this really is nothing but a sketchy PR stunt by the Department of Justice. And we have seen this movie before. The Maxwell interview is to the Epstein files what the Barr letter was to the Mueller investigation.
When we look back at April 2011, Epstein was already a convicted offender negotiating his so-called sweetheart deal, while still trading emails with Maxwell in a tone that experts now describe as arrogant and informal, riddled with typos and double commas, as if he never believed any of this would be read aloud in Congress one day. One of those emails, released with significant redactions, refers to a woman spending hours at his residence with a then-future president, while Maxwell replies in a way linguists have said resembles coded compliance rather than shock. On its face, that message has nothing to do with the Harvey family. But what has drawn quiet attention in 2025 is how that same thread, or at least its header and timestamp, is mirrored in discovery requests that sources say were filed this fall by lawyers representing a spouse in a major entertainment divorce. Those sources will not say the name out loud, but when they talk about a Southern socialite who later reinvented herself as the polished half of a motivational power couple, it does not take much for viewers to connect the dots. Fast forward to January 2019, when Epstein was still alive and emailing journalist Michael Wolff about Trump's first term, venting that he knew how dirty Donald is, and complaining about fixers flipping and financial disclosures. In another newly public message from that same year, he writes that Trump knew about the girls and references Ghislaine being asked to stop, language that Democrats seized on this November as proof of prior knowledge, while Republicans rushed out the fuller context. Again, on the surface, this is a DC fight about who protected whom. But what matters for Steve and Marjorie now is that all of these messages came from records subpoenaed from Epstein's estate. Legal insiders claim those same estate records are exactly what one side in the Harvey split is now trying to pry open through subpoenas. Not to relitigate Epstein, but to establish a pattern of powerful men using hush agreements, private jets, and unspoken understandings to manage the reputational fallout of their private encounters.
Now, I'm a Christian, but I ain't that good a Christian.
While all of that was simmering in sealed dockets and committee rooms, Steve Harvey was still on stage and on camera throughout 2023 and 2024, selling himself as a reformed husband and relationship expert. The man who had made mistakes, survived 2 divorces, and finally found salvation in a 3rd marriage that he presented as bulletproof. In August 2023, as rumors flared online that Marjorie had stepped out with a bodyguard and a private chef and was allegedly angling for a $200 million payout, Steve addressed a crowded business festival in Atlanta and told fans he and his wife were fine, brushing the gossip off as foolishness and insisting he did not have time for rumor mills. Around the same time, Marjorie posted a link to a religious blog titled How to Handle Being Lied About, framing herself as the target of online cruelty rather than the source of any wrongdoing. Publicly, the message was unity, faith, and family values. Privately, according to people with knowledge of the situation, lawyers in both camps were already collecting digital paper trails that could become bargaining chips if the marriage really collapsed. That is where the alleged connection to Epstein's inbox becomes more than just a conspiracy forum talking point. Sources familiar with the negotiations say Marjorie's camp has quietly explored whether any of Epstein's estate records, now in the hands of Congress and federal agencies, intersect with trips, events, or social circles that overlapped with her life before and after she married Steve in 2007. Remember, this is a woman whose first husband, Jim Townsend, was sentenced to life in prison in the 1990s for attempting to purchase 40 kilos of hard substances, only to be pardoned by Barack Obama after serving 26 years, and whose second husband, Donnell Woods, was also reportedly involved in large-scale smuggling.
I'd say that Steve Harvey was in a perfect position to help me get clemency. I wouldn't have to go through what I went through, but God's hand.
When new disclosures in 2017 and 2023 resurfaced those old cases, Townsend himself claimed that investigators once had enough on Marjorie to threaten charges, and that he cut a deal in part to keep her name out of indictments. In 2025, attorneys are now asking whether some of the same federal systems that tracked Epstein's estate could hold traces of those earlier investigations, and whether that history makes her look like a victim of men who operated in the shadows, a willing partner, or something in between.
He took my Winton from me. He turned my son against me.
For Steve, the stakes go far beyond who gets which house or which residual check from syndicated game shows. His entire modern brand is built on preaching loyalty, discernment, and what men really think about commitment, from his best-selling relationship books to his motivational tours. When his ex-wife Mary Shackelford accused him years ago of cheating, emotional harm, and worse, and later filed a $60 million lawsuit claiming soul destruction and a laundry list of supposed civil rights violations, a Los Angeles judge ultimately threw the case out and sent it back to Texas, while Steve's legal team blasted the allegations as frivolous and completely false. That win allowed him to frame Mary as bitter and himself as vindicated. If Marjorie now walks into a courtroom backed by references to Epstein's emails and alleged attempts to keep her future testimony sealed, the optics flip. Suddenly, the man who mocked rumor culture from the InvestFest stage looks, at minimum, like someone who has spent years trying to keep the most explosive parts of his private life off the record. Industry insiders say that is why we are hearing whispers about subpoenas aimed specifically at Epstein's estate and any overlapping travel logs, guest lists, or sealed correspondence that might place familiar names in unfamiliar settings. They stress that an email header is not a conviction, and that being copied on a message does not make someone part of any criminal conduct. But they also admit that in the court of public opinion, context is everything. A socialite whose first 2 husbands were linked to large-scale substance rings, whose daughter later moved in the same luxury circles as a music mogul, now serving a federal sentence tied to coercive private encounters, and whose current husband once met with Trump at Trump Tower in 2017 and faced backlash for it, does not get the benefit of the doubt when Epstein's name appears anywhere near hers.
Yeah, you got to understand, she's not going to be speaking on none of that because her whole thing is to hide her past.
And if, as sources allege, Steve's team has been fighting behind closed doors to keep Marjorie from having to give a full deposition that might touch any of this, then what happened on November 12, 2025 takes on a much darker meaning than a simple website refresh. This divorce is not about love. It is about leverage. And the moment Marjorie's legal team started peeling back the layers, they reportedly found something Steve Harvey never wanted anyone to see. A pattern of money moves, legal gambles, and quiet cleanups that suddenly look very different now that her lawyers are treating every number as a bargaining chip, not a blessing. We already know Steve has been through courtroom wars before. In 2017, his ex-wife Mary Shackelford filed a civil claim accusing him of destroying her life and seeking more than $60 million, using that now infamous phrase about her soul to describe what she says was done to her during and after their breakup. A judge later dismissed the case, but the filing itself laid out pages of accusations about emotional devastation, financial loss, and a former spouse who felt erased from the empire she says she helped build. For years, Steve's camp framed that as a nuisance suit from a bitter ex. Now, with Marjorie allegedly pushing for more than $200 million, that old number looks less like a one-off and more like a warning shot that he managed to dodge the first time.
And so she called me, and she just went off on me.
Insiders point out that Steve's finances have not been as straightforward as the motivational speeches make them sound. In 2024, entertainment accountants began whispering about sudden liquidations and quiet transfers. Properties moved into trusts, production interests restructured, speaking tour revenue rerouted through fresh entities with unfamiliar names. On paper, these can all be smart wealth management decisions for a man staring down retirement. But when lawyers for a spouse start combing through those same filings, every sale, every refinance, every strategic shift can be presented as evidence that someone saw a storm coming and started moving valuables to higher ground before the first legal lightning bolt hit. So why would a woman who has stayed publicly loyal for nearly 2 decades suddenly demand what sources describe as half of a near billion fortune? People close to the situation say it is not just about cash, it is about protection. The word they keep using is insurance.
She used to hate, see, that's what I'm saying. I'm gonna tell it all. I'm telling all y'all. She said, and it was like, she used to check dudes with big lips.
Not in the sense of a policy from a company, but as leverage in human form. The more she knows, the more she has allegedly tolerated, the higher the price of her silence becomes. If the stories about sealed dockets, estate subpoenas, and old investigations are even partially accurate, then Marjorie is not simply asking to walk away comfortable. She is, according to one industry veteran, pricing out what it will cost Steve to make sure certain questions never get answered under oath. That is where Lori Harvey enters the picture, not as a villain, but as the unpredictable variable nobody in this family can fully control anymore. In 2019, the same year Epstein was sending emails that referenced young women in his spaces and hinting that powerful men knew more than they admitted, Lori was being photographed across courts with Sean Diddy Combs. From Manhattan sidewalks in matching outfits, to sun-drenched lunches in Italy with Steve and Marjorie at the same table, to lavish getaways in Mexico. The images painted a story the family never confirmed, but never fully escaped either.
Her mother is 54 years old. Her mother is 5 years older.
A rising model stepdaughter, a legendary music figure decades older, and parents who seemed, at least in those photos, comfortable enough to dine and smile through it. Fast forward to 2024, when federal agents kicked in doors, seized hard drives, and began parading a parade of allegations about high-end freak-offs, coercive encounters, and private sessions involving paid companions and controlled substances inside Diddy's world. Court documents and press reports described a secret lifestyle built on power imbalances, cash, and carefully controlled access. When rumor sites and a handful of legal bloggers began whispering that Lori's name had appeared in at least one sealed affidavit linked to financial settlements and guest lists in that orbit, the story stopped being just another messy Hollywood breakup. Suddenly, the glamorous photos from 2019 looked less like harmless summer fun and more like potential exhibits in a much darker series of investigations.
What's the best advice they've given you?
Just remember that you're the prize at all times.
Boom.
Best advice.
The question that investigators, bloggers, and armchair analysts keep circling is brutal. Was Lori simply an on-again, off-again companion in those years? Or was she, knowingly or not, part of a wider ecosystem that her mother had seen from the inside long before? Remember, Steve legally adopted Lori in 2007, the same year Epstein's first criminal case sent shockwaves through elite social circles and forced a lot of wealthy men to reconsider who they traveled with and where they were photographed. Bringing Lori into the Harvey name gave her stability, status, and a famous last name. But now, with Epstein's records being dissected and Diddy's past being pulled apart in open court, some insiders quietly ask whether Steve adopted a daughter or a long-term liability that can now be used against him by lawyers who know exactly where the fault lines are. When we tie this back to the political world, the pattern gets even more unsettling. In 2019, Epstein was emailing journalist Michael Wolff and others, complaining about a former president he said knew about the girls and calling him unstable, while dropping hints about shared associates and shared secrets. At almost the same time, in the real estate canyons of New York, Steve Harvey was being photographed walking into Trump Tower for a meeting with the then president-elect. At the time, he defended it as a civic duty, saying both Barack Obama's team and Trump's transition staff had encouraged him to sit down and talk about inner-city housing. He came out of that tower praising Trump's openness and saying he believed something positive could come from their conversation, even as parts of his own audience turned on him overnight. Now look at the timing.
Her, doesn't it? She probably wants to get out early. So I think that we have more digging to do. I think the DOJ transparency effort here is the right thing, but The reason it's on a Friday, Will, is I think there are no smoking guns. There's other places we have to look.
Well, Buck, you appropriately...
Epstein's estate materials, including those 2019 messages about girls and Trump's supposed awareness, are pouring into congressional servers in late 2025, at the exact moment House Republicans decide to release more than 20,000 pages in a political brawl over who enabled what. Steve's controversial Trump meeting sits frozen in the public record from January 2017, complete with cheerful soundbites and photos beamed around the world. And wedged between those two dates is a third timeline. A long, brewing marital breakdown that, according to insiders, finally reached filing stage just as those Epstein pages hit the internet and cable news. 3 storylines, 3 reputations, 1 shared theme. Powerful men who thought their private dealings would never be pulled into the light. The harshest commentators put it even more bluntly. In their view, we are looking at 3 men who built empires on secrets. Epstein, who weaponized silence clauses and hush agreements until the system closed in on him. Trump, who has stared down accusations, settlements, and trials while still clinging to his image as the ultimate dealmaker. And Steve Harvey, who turned his own marital missteps into a brand of wisdom, selling books and tours that promise to decode what men really think and how women can protect themselves from heartbreak. 2 of those men are still standing, at least for now. The third figure in this triangle is not a man at all, but a woman who, sources say, is finally preparing to speak in a setting where every word is recorded, sworn, and punishable if proven false. That is why the phrase financial war does not really cover what is unfolding here. If Marjorie's legal team truly has its hands on cross-sections of Epstein estate material, Diddy-related filings, and old federal case references from her first 2 marriages, then those $200 million being whispered about start to look like the price tag for silence across multiple eras of scandal.
So I just keep going through. But then I'll tell you something too, haters motivate me. Because when they talking about me, that means I'm doing something.
It is not just one marriage on the line, it is an entire mythology. The myth of the self-made family man who turned chaos into clarity. The myth of the blended clan that rose above street histories and industry rumors. The myth of a household that, for all its drama, was fundamentally safe, controlled, and guided by a man who knew exactly what he was doing. And yet, in this moment, it feels like Marjorie is the one holding the real control. Legal insiders say the most chilling detail in the latest round of filings is not the number of properties, not the valuation of game show syndication, not even the retroactive accounting on years of touring income. It is a simple line about anticipated testimony and associated third-party records. A polite legal way of hinting that if certain demands are not met, certain stories could be told in a forum Steve has managed to avoid for most of his career. A courtroom where cameras may not roll, but transcripts eventually leak. So where does that leave us, watching from the outside as this polished empire flickers? It leaves us staring at a woman who, for years, said almost nothing while standing beside a man who said everything for a living. It leaves us re-examining Lori's glamorous jet-set years and asking whether those vacations were just holidays or chapters in a larger script her parents did not fully control. It leaves us replaying those images of Steve shaking hands at Trump Tower and wondering how many overlapping guest lists, donors, and private flight manifests sit in archives that investigators are only now beginning to map. And now, here is the line that should make everyone in this story sit up a little straighter. Marjorie Harvey did not just file for divorce. She filed a subpoena. And the second that testimony becomes public, Steve Harvey will not just lose his marriage, he will lose the one thing he has spent 20 years selling. The illusion that he was ever in control. So what do you think happens when a woman who has watched the secrets of moguls, politicians, and entertainers for decades finally decides her silence is no longer worth the price? Drop your thoughts, your theories, and your predictions in the comments, because this saga is only getting started. And until the next revelation drops, take care of yourselves, stay sharp, and we will see you in the next story.